Fuchi. The fashion industry has produced some genuinely terrifying things over the years, but none quite as literal about it as Fuchi. She looks the part of a high-end model, tall, slender, pale, right up until she smiles and reveals rows of razor-sharp fangs dripping with saliva. Now, before you ask for her OnlyFans, it's not necessarily a red flag in the modeling/fashion industry. These people are pretty weird after all. But Fuchi happens to be 8 foot tall, has claws for hands, and can seemingly alter her size or presence at will. So yeah, that's more red flags than a Chinese communist parade, and just like a real model, or the average Instagram influencer, Fuchi is aggressively vain about her image. Photographing her without permission doesn't just get you cancelled on X, it gets you almost eaten, which is exactly what happened to Junji Tsujii after he snapped her picture once. Her most famous appearance is in Fashion Model, where a film crew hires her thinking she'll spruce up their low-budget production. But what happened instead is she eats the lead actress mid-shoot, announces herself as the new star, and then develops a massive crush on the screenwriter Iwasaki, so much so that Fuchi stalks him through the woods, giggling before eventually catching him and deciding she likes him enough to just keep him around rather than, eat him. Some dive first while others drown indeed. Fuchi also later haunts Shuichi's nightmares as his wife, living in a haunted house together with their monster son Binzo, before swallowing them both whole. And the terrifying part about it is, Shuichi wakes up equal parts horrified and weirdly happy about it, which begs the question, is he an average Redditor, a Discord mod, or just a man of culture? Now, surprise, surprise, Fuchi's modeling career might just be an illusion or a mind trick she projects so she can do what real Hollywood celebrities do, eat poor folks. Hellstar Remina. There's a long-standing tradition in science of naming your discoveries after people you love, and Dr. Oguro was no exception. He discovered a new planet emerging from a wormhole on the same day his daughter Remina was born, so he named it after her, which was a lovely gesture right up until the planet revealed itself to be a living, hungry, eldritch entity moving at the speed of light directly toward Earth. From a distance, it looks like a massive purple gaseous planet until it gets close enough to show you the giant vertical slit eye and the mouth full of needle-like teeth. But most impressively, the entity has a long forked tongue that it can use to lick entire worlds apart, which is exactly the kind of inspiration some Wattpad writers are looking for. Hellstar Remina devoured the entire Hydra constellation on its way here, then casually took out Saturn, Jupiter, and Mars like they were rest stops and swallowed Earth's moon as what can only be described as an amuse-bouche. What a bad boy, Amorita? And it's not just mindlessly hungry either. When scientists sent a team of astronauts to explore its surface, Remina possessed their bodies and used them to lure the second team in. Back on Earth, society completely collapsed into a doomsday cult whose solution to an approaching planet-eating entity was to hunt down the human girl named Remina and dispose of her. But whoopsie, it didn't solve the problem. Instead, the story ends with Hellstar Remina eating Earth. The hanging balloons. Most horror stories have the decency to make their monsters look immediately threatening, but Junji Ito looked at children's party balloons and said, "I want you on my team." The whole thing kicks off after an idol named Terumi Fujino unalives herself, and shortly after, giant floating balloon heads start appearing all over Japan, each one looking exactly like a specific living person, with a nope rope dangling underneath. They drift silently towards whoever they look like, use that person's own voice to lure them in and get rid of them. But here's where it gets really nasty. You cannot destroy a balloon before it reaches its owner, because attacking it causes the living person it resembles to start physically turning into nylon themselves. So you can't fight it, you can't destroy it, and you can't protect anyone from it. Every time a new person dies, new balloons appear for more living people, so the longer this goes on, the worse it gets. The protagonist of the story, Kazuko, barricades herself at home and watches her family get picked off one by one, completely powerless to stop any of them. Now, it's not a Junji Ito story if it doesn't represent something. The balloons are actually a metaphor for contagious despair, the idea that hopelessness spreads from person to person, multiplying with every loss. The Blackbird. This monster is every vegan's worst nightmare. The Blackbird first appears as a beautiful smiling woman who keeps showing up to force feed injured and stranded people with pre-chewed meat, French style, while they're too weak to refuse, which is already several layers of horrible before you even find out what the meat actually is. Well, it's from the body of the victims in the future. Birdwatcher Kumi finds a hiker named Moriguchi barely alive on a mountain, and Moriguchi explains that a woman kept him alive for a month by feeding him this way, and later, DNA testing confirms the meat came from Moriguchi's own body, meaning she traveled through time specifically to feed him to himself, which is something that shouldn't be possible to write. She keeps returning even after he's rescued, showing up at his hospital bed, trying to feed him an eyeball. and when Kume chases her off, she transforms into a colossal black bird and flies away, which is new information that raises considerably more questions than it answers. Moriguchi eventually moves on, seems genuinely fine, sends a postcard, and then a few years later, his frozen body is found at the peak of Mount Fuji with the giant bird munching on him, and his diary explains she found her way into his locked apartment, began munching on him when he asked her to stop, and imprisoned him in a volcanic crater to finish the job. By the end of the story, she's already started the whole process over again with Kumi. The honey gods. Somewhere in a South American jungle, there are trees that produce the most delicious substance any human being has ever tasted, and the indigenous tribe that lives near them has exactly one rule about harvesting it: eat it, but don't get caught. Which isn't a metaphor, by the way. You see, the trees are sentient and have hand-like branches that can teleport across the planet in an instant. And if they catch you consuming their sap carelessly, those branches will find you where you are and mess you up. Incredible Hulk style. A man named Oji brought some back to Japan and followed the rules carefully for a while, until his friend Sugio got hold of the jar and drank too much in one sitting, at which point Ogi was promptly pancaked against his own wall. Sugio, not drawing the obvious conclusion, split the remaining supply among his friends, and they started dropping one by one, mosquitoed against walls, pavements, and eventually the bottom of a river. Each time someone got a little too greedy. But the real horror isn't even the getting smashed part, it's that once you've had the honey, every other food becomes completely tasteless. This leaves survivors who try to quit the honey become absolutely miserable, thin and malnourished. So now, they're stuck between starving or getting murked by evil Groot. Tomie. She was by all accounts just a high school girl, vain, manipulative, a little ditzy, but nothing that would qualify as a genuine threat to human civilization. That changed when her classmates and a teacher rearranged her, at which point her cells developed regenerative abilities that turned her into something considerably harder to deal with than an angsty teenager going through a phase. Tomie looks like an impossibly beautiful young woman with long dark hair and a mole under her left eye, and she drives every man she encounters into an obsessive, murderous frenzy that inevitably ends with them terminating her, which is where the problem actually starts, because she regenerates from any fragment of her body, any cell, any hair, and each piece grows into a completely new Tomie clone, meaning that every attempt to get rid of her just produces more of her. Every clone shares the same memory and personality, and they all despise each other, each one trying to eliminate the others while simultaneously manipulating innocent people to do the actual killing for them, which is efficient if nothing else. The only thing that can permanently stop a clone is total incineration, and even then, there's at least one documented case of her ashes forming a face in the air and announcing that every single ash would grow into a new Tomie, so even that isn't a guarantee. She does have one weakness though: cameras can't be fooled by whatever she projects, and photographs always show her true form, a horribly distorted image with a second malformed head growing out of her normal one. Death Stench. Junji Ito looks like your typical harmless uncle, but he once looked at the shark from Jaws and thought, that's terrifying, but what if it could also walk on land? The death stench is a bacterial plague that the Imperial Japanese Army developed during World War II. The idea was that it would infect sea creatures and make them produce a decomposing gas, and then they would strap mechanical spider legs onto those rotting animals and walk them into enemy territory, which is honestly really creative, but you can't expect anything less from the Japanese Imperial Army. The prototypes were destroyed when American forces sank the transport ship carrying them, but the death stench had been sitting at the bottom of the ocean this whole time, quietly building its own walking machines out of the shipwreck debris, and eventually sent them all ashore onto mainland Japan. Now, the gas itself is nightmare fuel. It's alive, filled with malicious humanoid spirits, and even infects humans the same way it infected fish. One character who sees the stench in its true form, twisted burnt faces and hands with eyes on them, goes immediately and irreversibly mad, which is a totally valid crash out. It's Ito at his most viscerally unpleasant, a story about a smell so catastrophic it ends civilization. Binzo Tsujii. For everyone who thought Shuichi Tsujii, the nail-eating, curse-obsessed little gremlin briefly mentioned in the Fuchi entry, couldn't possibly produce anything worse, allow me to introduce his son. Binzo is what happens when Shuichi's chaotic energy meets Fuchi's monstrous nature, and the result is not great for anyone in the immediate vicinity. He has Shuichi's dark hair and head shape, but Fuchi's jagged rows of teeth, claws, and wild eyes, so he got the worst of both parents, which is saying something given that one of those parents is a vicious demon supermodel. His clothes are permanently torn and soaked in blood, which is less of a fashion statement and more of an occupational hazard when you genuinely cannot stop eating people. He appears in two stories. In The Haunted Mansion, Visitors stumble upon him happily munching on a policeman, which is not standard haunted house fare even by haunted house standards. In the Tsujii front, he's kept in a cage, the bare minimum precaution, and when someone kicks it open, he crawls out and immediately bites his own father, which tells you everything you need to know about the family dynamic. He exists as the nightmare version of the Tsujii family's future, Tsujii's chaos, Fuchi's hunger, and absolutely none of the impulse control that would make either of those things manageable. If you enjoyed this video, please click the like button and subscribe. Thanks for watching.